She covered the marks beneath silk and shame, but the Duke's hand found the truth she couldn't speak. The November mist shrouded St. Corvin's chapel in ghostly silence. Lady Seraphine Ardent knelt before the altar, her slender frame draped in pale blue silk that cascaded like water to the stone floor. 3 candles flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness, casting tremulous shadows upon her bowed head. The fabric of her sleeve slipped momentarily as she raised a gloved hand to her heart, revealing for the briefest instant a shadow of yellowed bruising upon her wrist before she hastily adjusted the garment. "The fallen sparrow returns to prey," whispered Lady Mirath Greaves from the rear pew, her voice carrying through the chapel like a winter draught. How peculiar that shame does not keep her from God's house. The congregation, a meagre gathering of Somerset's elder gentry, turned as one to observe the kneeling figure. Fans opened and closed with the sound of bird wings. Gloves tightened around prayer books. Seraphine did not turn. She had grown accustomed to becoming stone when whispers arose. For 12 months, she had weathered the storm of scandal with nothing but silence as her shield and silk as her armor. Every mark upon her body was carefully hidden, every truth locked behind lips that had forgotten how to form certain words. "The season shall not forget what she has done," continued Lady Greaves, her voice rising just enough to ensure Seraphine would hear. "Nor what was done to her, I dare say." A strained silence fell upon the chapel. The vicar paused in his preparations, glancing uncomfortably toward the altar. Even the most hardened gossips of Somerset found themselves momentarily discomfited by such naked cruelty. It was then that the heavy oak doors swung open, admitting a cold draught and a tall, imposing figure. The Duke of Illyrian, Lucien Davenant, stood framed in the archway, his face half illuminated by the fading light. His countenance revealed nothing, yet everything about his sudden presence commanded attention. His greatcoat, still beaded with mist, swept behind him as he removed his hat with deliberate slowness. "Your Grace," murmured Lady Greaves, her cheeks flushing with the dual pleasure of acknowledging rank and anticipating fresh material for gossip. "We did not expect you until Christmas services." Lucien did not answer immediately. His gaze moved past the assembly to rest upon the kneeling figure before the altar. Seraphine's back straightened imperceptibly, as though she could feel his scrutiny through the silk that veiled her shame. "I find," he said at last, his deep voice filling the chapel like distant thunder, "that one's soul often requires attendance before the calendar demands it." He moved forward, his footfalls echoing against stone. The congregation parted like water before him, their faces a mixture of confusion and anticipation. Lady Mirath's smile tightened at the corners as she realized he would not stop to exchange pleasantries. Seraphine heard his approach, but did not rise. Prayer had become her refuge, and she would not abandon it. Not even for him, especially not for him. Yet her hands trembled slightly as they clutched the worn leather of her prayer book. "Lady Ardent," he said, his voice lowered now, audible only to her and those nearest the altar. "Pray continue your devotions. I shall wait." A collective intake of breath swept through the chapel. The Duke of Illyrian, waiting upon anyone, much less a woman whose name had been struck from invitation lists throughout the county, was unprecedented. Seraphine finally turned, her grey eyes meeting his blue ones for the first time in months. "Your Grace," she whispered, "I require no audience for my prayers." "Indeed," he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, "but perhaps they require a witness." The candles guttered in a sudden draught. Outside, the mist deepened into true darkness. Within the chapel walls, something shifted, subtle as a heartbeat, powerful as a turning tide. "The marks we bear," Lucien said quietly, his gaze never leaving her face, "are not always those of our making, are they, Lady Ardent?" The prayer book slipped from Seraphine's trembling fingers, landing with a soft thud upon the stone floor. Before she could reach for it, his gloved hand was already extending the volume to her. "Some truths," he continued, "cannot be spoken, but perhaps they might still be heard." 3 days passed before Seraphine encountered the Duke again. The morning frost had barely yielded to weak November sunshine when her modest curricle drew up to the entrance of the Ellsworth Foundation for Women's Aid. The charitable institution, housed in a converted manor at the edge of Somerset, had become her sanctuary over the past year. Here, at least, her presence was not met with whispers. "Lady Ardent," called Mrs. Ellsworth, hurrying down the steps to greet her. "What a fortunate coincidence. We have just received a most unexpected visitor." Seraphine's hand paused in the act of adjusting her bonnet. "I am not dressed for receiving visitors, Mrs. Ellsworth." "I fear, my dear, This particular visitor has made it quite clear he intends to wait upon your arrival. A chill that had nothing to do with the November air settled in Seraphine's chest as she followed Mrs. Ellsworth through the entrance hall. The familiar scent of beeswax and lavender did little to calm her racing heart. She knew, even before the drawing-room door opened, whom she would find within. The Duke of Illyrian stood before the fireplace, his tall frame silhouetted against the flickering flames. He turned at their entrance, bowing with formal precision. "Lady Ardent," he said, as though they had arranged this meeting by mutual consent, "I trust the morning finds you well." Mrs. Ellsworth, sensing the tension between them, murmured something about tea and hastily withdrew, closing the door with a decisive click that seemed to seal Seraphine's fate. "Your Grace," she said, maintaining a careful distance between them, "I confess myself surprised to find you at the Foundation. Our work here is rarely of interest to gentlemen of your standing." "Perhaps I am not a gentleman of standing," he replied, his voice carrying a note she could not quite define. "Or perhaps your work is of greater interest than you suppose." Seraphine moved to the window, seeking the comfort of distance and light. The silk of her dress whispered against the polished floor, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "You followed me from the chapel," she said at last. It was not a question. "I observed your departure," he corrected. "There is a distinction, Lady Ardent, a fine one that offers little comfort." Her fingers pressed against the cool glass of the window. "What is it you seek, Your Grace? I have nothing to offer that would interest you." Lucien moved toward her, his steps measured and deliberate. He stopped at a respectful distance, yet near enough that she could detect the faint scent of sandalwood and leather that clung to his clothing. "What interests me," he said carefully, "is why a woman of your standing devotes herself to this particular charity. Mrs. Ellsworth informs me you have been instrumental in establishing a wing for women who have—" He paused, choosing his words with obvious care. "Women who have suffered at the hands of those who should have protected them." Seraphine turned from the window, her composure momentarily fractured. "Mrs. Ellsworth speaks too freely. On the contrary, she speaks with the highest regard for your discretion and compassion." His gaze softened slightly. "It is a rare thing, Lady Ardent, to transform one's own suffering into salvation for others." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "Do you presume to know of what you speak?" she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I presume nothing." He took another step toward her, close enough now that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "But I have observed much. The way you shield your left wrist, how you flinch when voices rise in anger, the manner in which you place yourself with your back to the wall in every room you enter." Seraphine's breath caught. "Sir, you forget yourself." "No, my lady. For the first time in many years, I believe I remember myself." His voice dropped lower. "I remember the man I was trained to be, one who stands as witness to injustice, not merely a bystander to it." The clock on the mantel chimed the half-hour, startling them both. Seraphine used the momentary distraction to move toward the bell pull, intending to summon Mrs. Ellsworth back to the room. "Before you ring," Lucien said quickly, "allow me to state my purpose. I am here to make you an offer." Her hand froze in mid-air. "I'm not in the market for offers, Your Grace, regardless of their nature, even if such an offer might bring you justice." The word hung in the air between them, tantalizing, impossible. "Justice," she repeated, the word unfamiliar on her tongue after so long. What justice could possibly exist for a woman whose name has become synonymous with scandal, whose body bears the marks of— She stopped abruptly, color rising to her cheeks. Lucien's expression softened further. "Whose body bears the marks of another's cruelty," he finished for her. "Speak plainly, Lady Ardent. There is no shame in naming what was done to you." "There is nothing but shame," she whispered, her composure finally cracking. "Shame is all that remains when truth cannot be spoken." He moved forward then, closing the distance between them with 2 swift strides. For a moment she thought he might take her hand, and she recoiled instinctively. But he merely extended his own, palm upward, an offering rather than a demand. "Then allow me to speak it for you," he said, "for I believe I know who placed those marks beneath your silk." The carriage wheels crunched over gravel as it pulled up to the imposing facade of Illyrian Manor. Seraphine sat rigid against the velvet squabs, her face a careful mask of composure despite the turmoil within. Opposite her, the Duke maintained a respectful silence, his gaze occasionally meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "This is folly," she said at last as the carriage halted. "To be seen arriving at your estate, unchaperoned. Mrs. Ellsworth accompanies us," he reminded her, gesturing to the elderly woman dozing in the corner. And my sister awaits within. Your reputation shall remain intact, Lady Ardent. My reputation, she repeated, with a bitter smile. I fear that vessel shattered long ago, Your Grace. His expression darkened momentarily. A vessel may be mended, my lady, if the hands that work upon it are sufficiently skilled. The footman opened the door, and Lucien descended first, turning to offer his hand. Seraphine hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved fingers upon his. Through the layers of fabric, she could feel the strength in his grip, not crushing or controlling, but steady and reassuring. The entrance hall of Illyrian Manor stretched before them, a cathedral of marble and mahogany illuminated by crystal chandeliers. A tall, willowy woman with Lucien's same striking blue eyes descended the grand staircase to greet them. Lady Cassandra Davenant, Lucien said, may I present Lady Seraphine Ardent and Mrs. Ellsworth of the Women's Aid Foundation. Lady Cassandra's curtsy was graceful, but her scrutiny direct. Lady Ardent, welcome to Illyrian. My brother speaks most highly of your charitable work. Seraphine's surprise must have shown on her face, for Lady Cassandra's expression softened into a genuine smile. Come, let us retire to the blue drawing room. I've had refreshments prepared, and there is much to discuss before Lord Merrow's arrival. At the mention of that name, Seraphine's knees nearly buckled. Only Lucien's steadying hand at her elbow prevented her from stumbling upon the polished floor. Courage, my lady, he murmured. He will not see you. You will be safely concealed behind the panel in my study, with Mrs. Ellsworth beside you. To what purpose? She whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. What can be gained from such an encounter? Evidence, replied Lady Cassandra, overhearing as she led them down a corridor lined with ancestral portraits. My brother believes Lord Merrow has perpetrated similar acts against other women. If we can prove a pattern of behavior, it would still be his word against theirs, Seraphine interrupted, and a lord's word carries more weight than a dozen women's testimonies. Not, said Lucien grimly, when that lord is fool enough to confess his deeds to a peer of the realm, unaware that witnesses are present. The blue drawing room was as elegant as its name suggested, with sapphire-hued silk damask adorning the walls and furnishings of pale beech wood arranged before a magnificent marble fireplace. Seraphine sank into a chair by the window, suddenly exhausted by the weight of the past pressing upon her present. You intend to trick him into confession, she said flatly. And then what, Your Grace? Will you challenge him to a duel, have him arrested? Neither path leads to justice, only further scandal. There are other forms of justice, Lady Cassandra interjected, pouring tea with steady hands. Social ruin, financial devastation, exile from polite society. Seraphine's laugh held no humor. Those punishments are traditionally reserved for women who dare to speak against their abusers, not for the men themselves. Traditions, said Lucien quietly, may be altered when enough voices call for change. He seated himself across from her, his posture formal yet somehow intimate in its attention. I do not ask this lightly, Lady Ardent, nor do I promise a perfect resolution, but I do offer you the chance to reclaim your voice, and perhaps to save others from suffering similar fates. A clock somewhere in the vast house chimed the hour. Time seemed to compress and expand simultaneously as Seraphine considered his words. The silk of her dress rustled as she straightened her spine, decision crystallizing within her. Very well, she said, meeting his gaze directly, but I have conditions. Name them. First, if your plan fails, you will help me secure passage to America. I cannot endure another round of scandal. She paused, gathering courage. Second, you will establish a trust for the Ellsworth Foundation, regardless of the outcome. And third, her voice faltered briefly. Third, you will never speak of what you have seen, the marks, to anyone. Lucien's expression remained unreadable for a long moment. Then he inclined his head in a gesture that carried the weight of a solemn vow. I agree to your terms, my lady, though I would add one stipulation of my own. Seraphine tensed. Which is? That you no longer hide yourself away from the world. His eyes held hers with unexpected gentleness. The shame is not yours to bear, Lady Ardent. It never was. The door opened before she could respond, admitting a footman who announced in crisp tones, My lord, Lord Thane Merrow's carriage has been sighted on the main road. He shall arrive within 15 minutes. Lady Cassandra rose immediately. We must prepare. Come, Lady Ardent, I shall show you to the study. She paused, studying Seraphine's face with surprising compassion. Are you quite certain you wish to proceed? Seraphine stood, smoothing the silk of her gown with hands that only slightly trembled. For an instant, her sleeve pulled back, revealing the edge of a fading bruise. This time she did not rush to cover it. "Yes," she said, her voice steady at last. "It is time the truth was heard, even if I cannot speak it myself." The study of the Duke of Illyrian was a sanctuary of leather and mahogany, lined with books whose gilt spines gleamed in the afternoon light. A concealed panel, ostensibly a section of bookshelf, had been left slightly ajar, revealing a small observation chamber beyond. Seraphine stood within this hidden space, Mrs. Ellsworth's steadying presence beside her. Through a narrow aperture designed to look like decorative carving, she could observe the study while remaining unseen. "His Grace uses this chamber to observe his steward's meetings with tenants," whispered Mrs. Ellsworth, "to ensure fair treatment of those under his protection." Seraphine's fingers traced the polished wood of the panel. A man of unexpected depths, it would seem. Their whispers ceased as the study door opened. Lucien entered first, his bearing regal yet casual, as though this meeting were of little consequence. Behind him sauntered a figure that sent ice through Seraphine's veins, Lord Thane Merrow with his golden hair and deceptive smile. "Davenant," drawled Merrow, accepting the offered brandy with practiced ease. "How extraordinarily civil of you to extend an invitation, particularly given our last encounter at the Huntington Ball." "Ancient history," replied Lucian, his voice betraying nothing of his true purpose. "A gentleman does not harbor grudges over trifles," Merrow laughed, the sound grating against Seraphine's nerves like glass on stone. "A trifle? Is that what you call nearly coming to blows over a lady's honor?" "I recall it rather differently," said Lucian, seating himself behind his desk. "But that is not why I've asked you here today." "No." Merrow swirled his brandy, eyes narrowing slightly. "I confess myself curious. We have never been particular friends." "True. However, I find myself in need of your unique perspective on a delicate matter." Lucien's pause was calculated, a fisherman playing his line. "I am considering taking a wife." A flicker of surprise crossed Merrow's face before he masked it with a sardonic smile. The great Duke of Illyrian, finally conquered. The betting books at White's will need revision. Pray, who is the fortunate lady? "That remains undecided. I have several candidates under consideration." "How coldly rational," Merrow observed. "But then you were always the calculating sort. Unlike myself, I prefer to follow passion where it leads." "Indeed," said Lucien, his tone carefully neutral. "Your engagement to Lady Ardent was rather sudden, as I recall, and its dissolution equally so." The air in the hidden chamber seemed to thin. Seraphine gripped the edge of the small desk before her, steadying herself against a wave of memory. "Ah, Seraphine." Merrow's voice softened to a silken caress that made her skin crawl even now. "A lovely creature, sadly lacking in certain fundamental qualities one requires in a wife, such as obedience, for one." Merrow drained his glass and set it down with a decisive click. "A woman must understand her place, Davenant, particularly in private matters." Lucien refilled the glass with deliberate slowness. "I had heard she was quite biddable, modest, well-bred. On the surface, perhaps, but scratch beneath." Merrow's smile turned cruel. "I discovered a most disappointing willfulness, a tendency to question what should never be questioned." "And how did you address this tendency?" Lucien's voice remained level, though Seraphine could see the whitening of his knuckles around his own untouched glass. Merrow leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "A man has his methods, Davenant, lessons that need not leave visible evidence, though sometimes such evidence serves as a useful reminder. In the hidden chamber, Mrs. Ellsworth's hand closed over Seraphine's trembling one. "I see," said Lucien, his expression unreadable. "And these methods, they proved effective. For a time." Merrow settled back, self-satisfaction evident in every line of his body. "Until the foolish girl threatened to expose our private education to her father. Imagine airing such intimate matters. Most unbecoming." "Most," agreed Lucien. "And then?" "Then," Merrow's laugh held no humor, "then I ensured she would never be believed. A riding accident witnessed by my groom, a tendency toward hysteria, confirmed by my personal physician. A few choice rumors circulated at precisely the right moments." He spread his hands in a gesture of false regret. "The tongue is remarkably eager to believe the worst of a woman, particularly a beautiful one." Seraphine closed her eyes, the truth of his words cutting deeper than any physical blow he had ever landed. When she opened them again, She saw that Lucien had risen from his chair, his expression still composed but his eyes blazing with cold fury. "And you would recommend these methods for my future marriage?" Lucien asked, his voice dangerously soft. Merrow waved a dismissive hand. "Only if necessary. Most women yield to a firmer touch before such measures become essential. But make no mistake, Davenant. A duke you may be, but beneath the silk and lace, women are all the same. Wild creatures requiring a steady hand to tame their nature. Fascinating philosophy." Lucien moved to the fireplace, adjusting a small porcelain figurine on the mantel with precise movements. "Tell me, Merrow, did you apply the same philosophy to the Winters girl before she drowned herself last spring?" A moment of electric silence followed the question. Merrow's face drained of color before flushing an ugly red. "I don't know what you imply," he said stiffly. "Miss Winters was unstable. Everyone knew it." "Everyone knew what they were told," countered Lucien, "just as they knew what to think of Lady Ardent after your careful campaign against her." Merrow stood abruptly. "I did not come here to be insulted." "No," agreed Lucien, "you came here to incriminate yourself, and you have performed admirably." "What nonsense is this?" Lucien's smile was terrible in its coldness. "Did you truly believe I would seek marital advice from a man known to have broken his engagement under suspicious circumstances? A man whose previous fiancée drowned herself rather than face life as his wife? Your vanity exceeds even your reputation, Merrow." "How dare you?" Merrow hissed, moving toward Lucien with clenched fists. "You know nothing of these matters." "I know everything," replied Lucien, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly to the hidden chamber. "Every mark upon her skin, every lie you spread to cover your cowardice, every night she wakes screaming from the memory of your lessons. I know, Merrow, and now others know as well." "What others?" demanded Merrow, his voice rising sharply as he glanced around the study. "What trick is this, Davenant?" Lucien gestured toward the door, which opened to admit Lady Cassandra, accompanied by an elderly gentleman whose severe black coat and solemn demeanor marked him unmistakably as a man of law. "Lord Merrow," Lucien said formally, "may I present Mr. Harrington, Magistrate of Somerset County, and my sister, Lady Cassandra Davenant, who has been recording our conversation from the adjoining room." Lady Cassandra held up several sheets of paper covered in neat flowing script. "Your words, my lord, preserved for posterity, and the courts, should that become necessary." Merrow's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous entrapment. No court would—" "3 witnesses to a confession freely given," interrupted Mr. Harrington, his lined face grave. "The testimony of a peer of the realm. Evidence from no fewer than 4 physicians who treated Lady Ardent's injuries. I assure you, Lord Merrow, the courts would find much to consider." "You cannot prove anything," Merrow snarled, though the confidence was rapidly leaching from his voice. "It would be my word against a hysterical woman's." "Against several women," corrected Lady Cassandra. "Miss Winters left a letter, you see. Her family, understandably reluctant to air such matters publicly, entrusted it to my brother upon learning of his interest in your conduct." Behind the panel, Seraphine pressed her handkerchief to her lips. She had not known of another victim, had believed herself alone in her suffering and shame. The knowledge that others had endured similar treatment at Merrow's hands both horrified and strangely strengthened her. "What do you want?" Merrow demanded, abandoning pretense as sweat beaded upon his brow. "Money? Is that it?" Lucien's laugh held no humor. "Your entire fortune would not suffice, Merrow." "Then what?" "Satisfaction. I will not meet you on the field, Davenant. It would be tantamount to admitting guilt." "I do not seek your blood," replied Lucien coolly, "though I confess the thought has its appeal. No, what I seek is far simpler. Justice." Mr. Harrington stepped forward, producing a document from his coat. "This is a legally binding agreement, Lord Merrow. You will sign over half your annual income to the Ellsworth Foundation for Women's Aid for a period of 20 years. You will immediately depart England for the continent and remain abroad for no less than a decade. Any violation of these terms, any future accusation of similar behavior toward any woman, and the full details of your conduct will be published in every newspaper from London to Edinburgh." Merrow's face had turned the color of tallow. "You cannot possibly expect—" "I expect," Lucien cut in, his voice like ice, "that you will sign immediately or face charges of assault before the House of Lords. Your choice, Merrow. Public disgrace and possible imprisonment, or private penance and exile." "This is unconscionable," Merrow protested, though his eyes darted frantically between the faces surrounding him. A gentleman's conduct in his private affairs is subject to the same laws that govern all men, finished Mr. Harrington sternly. A fact you would do well to remember, my lord. A tense silence filled the study. In the hidden chamber, Seraphine hardly dared breathe. This moment, this choice, would determine whether she spent the rest of her life in fear or in freedom. "The pen, Merrow," said Lucien, his tone brooking no further argument. "Or shall I summon the constable instead?" With a muttered oath, Merrow snatched the pen from the desk. His hand trembled visibly as he scrawled his signature across the bottom of the document, the nib tearing the paper in his fury. "There," he spat, flinging the pen down. "Are you satisfied, Davenant?" "Not remotely," replied Lucien evenly. "But it will suffice for now." He turned to Mr. Harrington. "You have witnesses to the signature?" "I do, Your Grace. The document is legally binding." "Excellent." Lucien moved to the door and opened it, revealing 2 footmen waiting in the corridor beyond. "These men will escort you to your carriage, Lord Merrow. Your valet has already been instructed to pack your belongings and meet you at Portsmouth. I believe there is a ship departing for Calais this evening." "You planned this entire charade," Merrow said in disbelief. "How long have you been orchestrating my downfall?" Lucien's expression remained impassive. "Since the moment I saw the marks upon her skin that you sought to hide beneath silk and shame." Merrow's gaze snapped to him, understanding and fury dawning simultaneously. "She is here, isn't she? Watching this farce? Does she think this vindicates her? Does she imagine this restores her reputation?" Lucien stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Merrow could hear. "She is worth 1,000 of you. Remember that in your exile, Merrow. Remember it every day for the rest of your miserable life." With a final, venomous glare, Merrow allowed himself to be escorted from the study. The door closed behind him with a decisive click, leaving a silence that seemed to vibrate with the aftermath of confrontation. Lady Cassandra was the first to speak. "It is done, then?" "Yes," agreed Mr. Harrington, carefully folding the signed document. "Though I dare say we have not seen the last of his resistance. Men like Merrow rarely submit without further struggle." "Let him struggle," said Lucien grimly. "Every protest will only strengthen the case against him should he violate the terms." He crossed to the concealed panel and opened it fully, revealing Seraphine standing motionless within, her face as pale as marble, but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Lady Ardent," he said gently, extending his hand, "it is over." The ride back to Seraphine's modest cottage passed in silence, the carriage lamps casting intermittent pools of golden light across her face as they travelled the darkening country roads. Mrs. Ellsworth had been left at the foundation with a copy of the signed agreement and instructions to begin preparations for the substantial funds that would soon be at their disposal. Lady Cassandra had returned to the manor to oversee Merrow's departure, leaving Lucien to escort Seraphine home personally. "You are very quiet," he observed as the carriage turned onto the lane leading to Rose Cottage. The small property that had been her home since her father's death left her with little beyond a modest inheritance. "I find I have no words," she replied softly. "After so long keeping silence, I scarcely know how to voice what I feel." The carriage halted before the cottage, its thatched roof and stone walls glowing warmly in the twilight. A single lamp burned in the window. Hannah, her only remaining servant, faithfully awaiting her return. "Will you walk with me a moment?" Lucien asked as he handed her down from the carriage. "The evening is mild, and I confess I am reluctant to leave matters as they stand between us." Seraphine hesitated, then nodded, drawing her shawl more closely about her shoulders. They moved toward the small garden that flanked the cottage, where late roses still clung tenaciously to their stems despite the encroaching winter. "I never thanked you," she said at last, her voice barely audible above the gentle rustle of leaves, "for what you did today. No thanks are necessary. What was done should have been done long ago by someone with the authority to hold him accountable." Lucien's profile was stern in the fading light. "I only regret that it required your courage to see it accomplished." "My courage?" A sad smile touched her lips. "I hid in a secret chamber while you confronted him." "There was little courage in that." Lucien turned to her, his expression suddenly intense. "You survived him, Lady Ardent. You endured his cruelty, his lies, the scorn of society, and yet you did not break. You devoted yourself to helping other women who suffered similar fates. If that is not courage, I know not what is." They had reached a small stone bench beneath an ancient apple tree. Seraphine sank onto it, suddenly weary beyond words. After a moment's hesitation, Lucien joined her, maintaining a respectful distance between them. "What happens now?" she asked, looking down at her gloved hands. "Merrow is gone, but the world still believes his version of events. I am still the woman who cried assault to escape an engagement, who invented wounds to garner sympathy." "The truth can be made known," Lucienne suggested. "Mr. Harrington has offered to issue a formal statement clearing your name. To what end? The scandal would simply renew itself in another form. Ruined woman tells all," she mimicked bitterly. "I would become a spectacle of a different sort." Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant call of a nightjar. The first stars had begun to appear overhead, pinpricks of silver against deepening blue. "Then perhaps," Lucienne said carefully, "the truth might be known only to those who matter most. And who would that be, Your Grace? I have no family remaining, no close friends. Those disappeared with the first whisper of scandal. The only people who have shown me kindness this past year are Mrs. Ellsworth and her staff at the Foundation. And me," he added quietly, "if you would count me among that number." Seraphine turned to study his face, trying to discern his intent. The fading light cast half his features in shadow, making him more enigmatic than ever. "Why did you help me?" she asked abruptly. "The truth, if you please, not platitudes about justice or nobility." Lucienne's gaze remained steady. "Because I recognized something in you that I once saw in my mother." The admission caught her off guard. "Your mother?" "She too bore marks beneath her silk," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "My father was not a gentle man. She endured for years, hiding her suffering from the world, from her children, until one night when he went too far, understanding dawned in Seraphine's eyes. What happened? She fell from a balcony, or so the official account stated." His jaw tightened. "I was 14, old enough to suspect the truth, yet too young to challenge it. My father lived another decade before his heart finally gave out, a decade in which I watched him move through society, unchallenged, unpunished." "I am sorry," she whispered, momentarily forgetting her own pain in the face of his. "Truly. I swore then that if I ever encountered such a situation again, I would not remain silent." He turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "When I saw you in the chapel that day, the way you held yourself, the careful adjustments to your clothing, I knew, and I could not look away, as the world had looked away from my mother." Seraphine was silent for a long moment, absorbing this unexpected revelation. The night had deepened around them, the cottage windows glowing warmly in the darkness. "What will you do now?" Lucienne asked, his voice gentle. "Will you remain here at Rose Cottage?" "For a time," she replied thoughtfully. "The Foundation needs attention, particularly with these new funds. Beyond that," she trailed off, uncertainty clouding her features. "I confess I have not allowed myself to think beyond survival for quite some time. Perhaps," he suggested, "it is time to begin thinking of living rather than merely surviving." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding deeper than words could express. For the first time since Merrow had entered her life, Seraphine felt the faintest stirring of hope, like the first tender shoot breaking through winter soil. "It grows late," she said, rising from the bench. "Hannah will be concerned." Lucienne stood as well, maintaining the careful space between them. "Of course, forgive me for keeping you." They walked back toward the carriage in companionable silence. At the garden gate, Seraphine paused, gathering her courage. "Your Grace, Lucienne, I would like to invite you to tea tomorrow, if your duties permit." She spoke quickly before her newfound courage could desert her. "There is much still to discuss regarding the Foundation's future." The smile that transformed his austere features was like sunrise breaking over a mountain. "I should be honored, Lady Ardent." "Seraphine," she corrected softly, "after all we have shared today, I think we might dispense with formalities, at least in private." "Seraphine," he repeated, the name sounding like a vow on his lips. Then, with gentle deliberation, he removed his glove and extended his bare hand to her. "Until tomorrow." After a moment's hesitation, Seraphine slowly removed her own glove, revealing the fading marks upon her wrist. Instead of hiding them as she had for so long, she allowed them to remain visible as she placed her hand in his. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, and for the first time in a very long time, the words felt like a promise rather than a fear. Spring arrived at Rose Cottage with tentative splendor, painting the garden with daffodils and early tulips, whose vibrant petals seemed to mirror the gradual reawakening in Seraphine's own heart. In the 3 months since Lord Merrow's departure for the continent, she had slowly begun to reclaim pieces of herself once thought irretrievably lost. The foundation flourished under her guidance, its resources expanded by Merrow's substantial contributions and additional donations from several noble families who had quietly withdrawn support from his enterprises upon learning of his disgrace. Yet the most remarkable transformation had occurred within the cottage itself, where the Duke of Illyrian had become a regular visitor. What had begun as formal discussions regarding the foundation's management had gradually evolved into a friendship so comfortable that Hannah no longer announced his arrivals with ceremony, merely ushering him into whichever room Seraphine occupied with a knowing smile. On this particular April morning, they sat together in the small conservatory Lucien had helped her restore, surrounded by potted ferns and climbing jasmine that filled the air with subtle fragrance. The glass walls admitted generous sunlight, illuminating the portfolio spread between them on the wicker table. The Devonshire property would make an ideal second location, Lucien observed, tracing his finger along the boundaries of the estate depicted in the surveyor's drawing. 15 bedrooms, extensive grounds for privacy, and near enough to the village for practical matters. It seems perfect, agreed Seraphine, studying the papers with thoughtful eyes. Though I confess the prospect of overseeing 2 establishments somewhat daunting. You would not bear the burden alone. Lady Cassandra has expressed interest in taking a more active role, particularly in the educational aspects of the Foundation's work. Seraphine glanced up, surprise evident in her expression. Your sister would involve herself directly. I had thought her commitments in London would preclude such dedication. My sister, said Lucien with a small smile, finds London society increasingly tedious. She speaks quite highly of you, you know. I believe her exact words were refreshingly devoid of artifice. A faint blush colored Seraphine's cheeks. High praise indeed from one so discerning. She recognizes quality when she encounters it, he replied simply, his gaze lingering on her face in a way that deepened her blush. The easy silence that followed was interrupted by Hannah's arrival with a letter on a small silver tray. From London, my lady. The messenger awaits a reply. Seraphine recognized the elegant hand immediately. Lady Harrington, wife of the magistrate, and a recent convert to the Foundation's cause. She broke the seal with curious fingers, scanning the contents quickly before a small sound of distress escaped her lips. What is it? Lucien asked, immediately alert to her discomfort. Lady Harrington writes that Lord Merrow has been seen in London, she said, her voice suddenly tight. Despite the agreement, he has returned to England. Apparently, he has been speaking openly against me in certain circles, claiming I orchestrated his financial ruin through improper influence over you. Lucien's expression darkened. That man courts disaster with remarkable persistence. He also, continued Seraphine, her fingers clenching slightly around the letter, intends to attend the Countess of Ellesmere's spring ball tomorrow evening, where he will, and I quote, reveal the true nature of Lady Ardent's character to all assembled. Impossible, declared Lucien. He would not dare violate the terms so blatantly. Would he not? Seraphine's gaze returned to the letter. Lady Harrington seems quite certain of her information. She suggests I remain in Somerset until the matter is resolved. Hide away, in other words. Lucien's voice held a note of steel. While he once again controls the narrative surrounding your name. Seraphine set the letter aside with a sigh that seemed to contain all the weariness of the past year. What alternative exists? To confront him publicly would only create the very spectacle I have sought to avoid. Perhaps, said Lucien slowly, it is time the spectacle served you rather than him. What do you mean? He leaned forward, his expression intent. Seraphine, you have spent a year in seclusion, while your reputation was dismantled by a man who should have protected you. You have rebuilt your life with dignity and purpose, helping others who suffered similar fates. Now this same man threatens to undo all you have accomplished, not through legal channels, but through whispers and insinuations in the very society that once shunned you. Yes, she agreed cautiously, that appears to be his intention. Then deny him the shadows in which such tactics thrive. Lucien's voice grew more animated as the idea took shape. Attend the ball yourself. Face him before witnesses. Let truth stand in plain sight, where lies cannot survive its scrutiny. Seraphine stared at him in undisguised shock. You cannot be serious. I have not entered London society since Merrow destroyed your standing there, he finished for her. Precisely my point. Your continued absence only reinforces the narrative he created. Your presence, composed, dignified under my family's protection, would challenge that narrative more effectively than any written statement or legal proceeding. The conservatory fell silent, save for the gentle patter of a spring shower that had begun to drum against the glass roof. Seraphine rose and moved to the window, a reflection ghostly against the rain-streaked panes. "Even if I were to consider such a course," she said finally, "I have received no invitation to the Countess's ball, nor would one be forthcoming given my current standing." "Lady Cassandra received an invitation," Lucien replied smoothly, "as did I. We are permitted guests of our choosing. The scandal would be immediate." "The scandal already exists, Seraphine." He joined her at the window, careful not to crowd her. "The only question is whether you will allow it to be shaped by Merrow's hand once more, or claim ownership of your own story." She turned to face him, searching his expression for any hint of doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she asked the question that had haunted her since that first day in the chapel. "Why do you care so deeply about my reputation, Lucien? What can it possibly matter to the Duke of Illyrian whether a fallen woman reclaims her name?" For a moment he seemed taken aback by the directness of her inquiry. Then, with characteristic thoughtfulness, he answered, "Perhaps because I see not a fallen woman, but one who was pushed, and who has risen nonetheless, stronger and more magnificent than before." His words hung in the air between them, weighted with an emotion neither had yet dared to name. The rain continued its gentle percussion on the glass roof, filling the silence with its music. "If I were to attend," Seraphine said at last, each word carefully measured, "I have nothing suitable to wear. My wardrobe has been adapted for country life and charitable work, not London ballrooms." A smile transformed Lucien's austere features. "I believe Lady Cassandra could assist with that particular concern. She maintains an extensive collection of gowns for various occasions, and her dressmaker is quite skilled at rapid alterations. And accommodation. I closed the London house after Father's death. My family maintains a townhouse in Grosvenor Square. There are ample guest chambers, and Lady Cassandra would be present as chaperone." With each obstacle she raised, Lucien provided a solution, not with the dismissive confidence of one accustomed to command, but with the careful consideration of one who understood her fears and sought to address them with respect. "You have thought of everything," she observed, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. "Not everything," he admitted. "I cannot predict how society will receive you, nor can I guarantee Merrow will not cause some scene. I can only promise that you will not face him alone." The rain eased, sunlight breaking through the clouds to cast dappled patterns across the conservatory floor. Seraphine watched the play of light and shadow, seeing in it a reflection of her own circumstances, darkness yielding, however tentatively, to illumination. "Very well," she said, squaring her shoulders with newfound resolve. "I shall attend the Countess of Ellesmere's ball, not as a supplicant seeking readmission to society, but as a woman who refuses to be defined by another's cruelty." Lucien's expression softened into something that might have been pride. "Then we depart for London tomorrow. I shall send word to Lady Cassandra immediately." As he moved to pen the necessary correspondence, Seraphine returned her gaze to the garden beyond the glass, where raindrops clung to petals and leaves like tiny prisms, transforming ordinary light into something extraordinary. "Lucien," she called softly. When he looked up, she continued, "Thank you for seeing what I could be, even when I could not see it myself." His answering smile held a warmth that reached across the room to touch her heart. "The strength was always there, Seraphine. You simply needed someone to bear witness to it." The Countess of Ellesmere's ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their light refracted through crystal chandeliers to cast a constellation of brilliance upon the assembled aristocracy of London. From her position near one of the marble columns that flanked the grand entrance, Seraphine observed the swirling tableau of silk and jewels with outward composure that belied her thundering heart. "You look magnificent," murmured Lady Cassandra beside her, adjusting the fall of Seraphine's silk shawl with sisterly attention. "That shade of sapphire suits you perfectly." The gown had been Lady Cassandra's gift, a creation of midnight blue silk that shimmered like deep water when Seraphine moved, its bodice adorned with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light with every breath. Unlike the high-necked, long-sleeved garments she had worn since Merrow's abuse, this gown left her shoulders bare, with sleeves that ended just below her elbows. The faint marks that remained visible on her forearms had been neither concealed with powder nor hidden beneath long gloves. They were simply there, part of her story, neither emphasized nor denied. "I still think this is madness," Seraphine whispered, watching as heads began to turn in their direction, whispers fluttering through the crowd like autumn leaves. "They are already talking." "Let them talk," replied Lady Cassandra. with serene confidence. Their gossip loses power when you face it directly. Ah, here comes my brother. Lucien approached through the crowd, which parted before him like water before the prow of a ship. His evening attire, impeccably tailored in black with subtle silver accents that complemented Seraphine's gown, emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. Several young ladies watched his progress with undisguised interest, their expressions shifting to surprise and speculation as he came to stand beside Seraphine with unmistakable purpose. "The Countess has been informed of your arrival," he said, bowing formally over Seraphine's hand. "She sends her compliments and looks forward to making your acquaintance later this evening." "How diplomatic of her," murmured Lady Cassandra with a knowing smile. "I dare say curiosity has overcome conventional hesitation." "Indeed," agreed Lucien. Then, turning to Seraphine with gentle solicitude, "Are you well? We need not remain long if the strain proves too great." "I am perfectly composed," she assured him, though her fingers tightened imperceptibly around his arm, "though I confess I have not yet caught sight of Lord Merrow among the guests. He arrived some quarter-hour ago," supplied Lady Cassandra, her gaze scanning the crowd with practiced ease, "currently holding court near the East Terrace doors, with Lords Pembroke and Ashton in attendance." Seraphine's gaze followed the direction indicated. There indeed stood the man whose cruelty had reshaped her life, elegant as ever in fashionable evening wear, his golden head bent toward his companions in what appeared to be earnest conversation. As though sensing her scrutiny, he glanced up, his expression freezing in naked shock as he recognized her. "He has seen us," she said quietly, a tremor running through her despite her determination to remain steady. "Good," replied Lucien, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "Let him wonder what comes next." What came next was the orchestra striking up the opening measures of a waltz. Couples began to form on the dance floor, moving in graceful synchronicity beneath the sparkling chandeliers. "Lady Ardent," said Lucien formally, stepping back to offer a perfect bow, "would you honor me with this dance?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance far beyond the simple request. To dance the waltz with the Duke of Illyrian, before the assembled elite of London society, would be to make a statement impossible to misinterpret. Seraphine hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "The honor would be mine, Your Grace." As he led her onto the floor, the whispers around them crescendoed. Ladies bent their heads together behind fluttering fans. Gentlemen exchanged significant glances over crystal goblets of champagne. Yet none of it seemed to touch Lucien, whose attention remained fixed solely upon Seraphine as he drew her into the first sweeping turn of the waltz. "Everyone is watching," she murmured, acutely conscious of the hundreds of eyes following their progress across the polished floor. "Let them watch," he replied, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "Let them see how courage and dignity outshine mere scandal." They moved together with surprising harmony, her gown a swirl of midnight blue against the austere black of his attire. With each turn around the floor, Seraphine felt something within her unfurling, a sense of liberation, of reclamation, that brought a natural flush to her cheeks and a new brightness to her eyes. "You are smiling," observed Lucien, his own expression softening in response. "I had forgotten," she admitted, "how it feels to move freely, without shame or fear." His hand tightened slightly at her waist, a gesture of understanding too intimate for words. They completed another circuit of the floor, and Seraphine became aware that other couples had begun to give way before them, creating space for their dance as though acknowledging its significance. As the music drew toward its conclusion, Lucien guided her toward the center of the floor. The final notes hung in the air, and in that suspended moment he bowed over her hand with formal grace that nonetheless conveyed a depth of feeling visible to all who observed. "The Duke of Illyrian honors Lady Ardent with the first waltz," someone murmured loudly enough to be heard across the now silent ballroom. "How unexpected." "Not unexpected," corrected Lucien, his voice pitched to carry without seeming to do so. "Merely long overdue." A ripple of reaction moved through the assembly, some faces showing surprise, others calculation, a few displaying genuine warmth. Before anyone could approach, however, a commotion arose near the East Terrace doors. Lord Merrow was pushing his way through the crowd, his face flushed with what might have been wine or rage. "What farce is this, Davenant?" he demanded, coming to an unsteady halt before them. "Bringing her here, parading her before society as though she were worthy of your protection." The ballroom fell silent, hundreds of witnesses frozen in anticipation of scandal. Seraphine felt Lucien's body tense beside her, his hand moving to cover hers where it rested upon his arm. "Lord Merrow," he said, his tone revealing nothing of the anger Seraphine could sense beneath his composed exterior. "I believe the terms of our agreement included your absence from England for a period of no less than 10 years. Agreements made under duress have no binding power," sneered Merrow, his gaze shifting to Seraphine with naked malice. "Did she tell you how she begged for my attentions before turning vicious when I withdrew them? Did she show you the marks she inflicted upon herself to support her lies?" A collective gasp arose from the onlookers. Lady Cassandra had materialized at Seraphine's other side, her presence a silent bulwark of support. "That is quite enough, Merrow." Lucien's voice had dropped to a dangerous softness. "You dishonor yourself with these falsehoods." "Falsehoods?" Merrow laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Ask her to show her arms, her shoulders, the marks she claims I left upon her. Ask her to prove what cannot be proven." "I need prove nothing," said Seraphine, finding her voice at last. Though her heart raced painfully, her words emerged clear and steady. "Truth requires no performance, Lord Merrow. It simply is." Fine words from a woman who fabricated assault to escape an engagement she found inconvenient, he retorted. "Tell me, Lady Ardent, do you still wake screaming from nightmares of my lessons, or have you found comfort in the Duke's bed instead?" The insult hung in the air, so brazen that even the most avid gossips among the ton drew back in shock. Lucien's hand moved to his side, where a sword might once have hung in an earlier era. Lady Cassandra stepped forward, her refined features tight with fury, but it was Seraphine who spoke first. "I do still wake from nightmares, Lord Merrow," she said, her voice carrying easily in the hushed ballroom. "Though less frequently now, the marks you left have faded, both those visible upon my skin and those hidden within my spirit. I have found healing not in hatred or vengeance, but in helping other women who suffered similar fates, some at your hands, some at the hands of men like you." She extended her arms, allowing her shawl to fall away and the sleeves of her gown to reveal the faint remnants of bruising that still adorned her skin. "I hide nothing, not anymore. You sought to break me with cruelty, then with shame, and finally, with silence. You failed in all three endeavors." For a moment, Merrow seemed genuinely taken aback by her composure, then his expression hardened into something ugly. "Pretty speech. I wonder how many hours Davenant spent rehearsing it with you. Tell me, do you practice in his bed, or merely in his study?" Before anyone could react to this fresh outrage, a new voice entered the confrontation, cool, authoritative, and unmistakably aristocratic. "Lord Merrow," said the Countess of Ellesmere, materializing from the crowd like an avenging spirit wrapped in silver brocade. "You forget yourself, sir. In my home, before my guests, you dare to speak thus to a lady under the protection of one of England's oldest dukedoms." Merrow turned to her, momentarily disarmed by this unexpected intervention. "Madam, I merely speak truth that others fear to voice. This woman," interrupted the Countess with glacial precision, "is my guest, as are you. One of you, however, shall shortly cease to enjoy that distinction." She gestured subtly, and two liveried footmen appeared at her side. "Lord Merrow, you will be escorted to your carriage. You will not return to my home during this season or any subsequent one. Is that perfectly clear?" A wave of murmurs swept through the assembly. Public censure from a hostess of the Countess's standing was tantamount to social exile. Merrow's face drained of color as he grasped the full implications of his position. "You cannot," he began, but the Countess merely raised one imperious eyebrow. "I assure you, sir, I can, and I have. The choice now remains whether you depart with what dignity you can muster, or must be removed by less genteel means." Summer came to Somerset in a glory of roses and golden light. The gardens of Rose Cottage had never bloomed more profusely, their carefully tended beds spilling over with fragrant abundance that seemed to reflect the renewed spirit of their mistress. Seraphine moved among them now, scissors in hand, selecting blooms for the arrangements that would grace the dining table that evening. The soft hum of bees and the distant laughter of women from the newly expanded east wing of the cottage formed a peaceful accompaniment to her task. 4 months had passed since the confrontation at the Countess of Ellesmere's ball, 4 months in which the world had slowly, but with surprising finality, reordered itself around certain immutable truths. Lord Merrow had departed England the morning after his public disgrace, this time with the weight of social censure added to his legal obligations. The story of his conduct, once confined to whispers, had emerged into the light, not through scandal sheets or drawing-room gossip, but through the dignified testimony of women who had suffered at his hands, and found the courage to speak after witnessing Seraphine's stand. The Ellsworth Foundation had expanded its work, opening the Devonshire property as a second sanctuary where women could heal from wounds both visible and hidden. Lady Cassandra had indeed taken an active role in its management, revealing an unexpected talent for administration and a genuine passion for educational reform. Even the Countess of Ellesmere had lent her considerable social influence to the cause, hosting a series of charitable events that had filled the Foundation's coffers while simultaneously establishing its work as a worthy endeavor among the ton. As for Seraphine herself, the transformation had been both subtle and profound. She no longer wore her sleeves perpetually long, nor did she startle at sudden movements. The nightmares still came occasionally, but with decreasing frequency. Most significantly, she had rediscovered her voice, not merely the physical act of speaking, but the deeper courage to express her truth without shame or apology. "Gathering flowers for tonight's dinner, I see," observed a familiar voice from the garden gate. Seraphine turned to find Lucien watching her, his tall figure outlined against the late afternoon sunlight. Since their return from London, he had maintained a respectful distance, visiting regularly but always with careful propriety. Today, however, something in his expression suggested a departure from their established patterns. "The roses are particularly fine this year," she replied, setting her basket on the stone bench. "Hannah insists it's due to the new fertilizing methods you suggested, though I suspect the unusually mild spring deserves some credit as well." He moved closer, his gaze taking in the garden, the cottage, and finally settling on her face with undisguised warmth. "The gardener deserves most of the praise, I think. Nothing blooms without proper care and attention." "Now you flatter me," she said lightly, though a faint blush colored her cheeks. "What brings you to Rose Cottage today? I thought you were attending to estate matters at Illyrian." I am." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant, his usual composure giving way to a subtle tension she had rarely observed in him. "That is, in fact, what brings me here." Seraphine tilted her head slightly, puzzled by his manner. "Estate matters bring you to my garden. I confess I don't understand." Instead of answering immediately, Lucien reached into his coat and withdrew a small object wrapped in silk. With deliberate care, he placed it in her palm. "What is this?" she asked, feeling the weight of something cool and metallic beneath the fabric. "Open it," he suggested quietly. "Please." With curious fingers, Seraphine unwrapped the silk to reveal an antique key of intricate design, its bow fashioned in the shape of intertwined roses. "It's beautiful," she said, examining the craftsmanship, "but I don't understand its significance." "It is the master key to Illyrian Manor," Lucien explained, his voice taking on a note of formal solemnity. "Traditionally passed from one Duchess of Illyrian to the next." The implication of his words slowly dawned upon her, bringing with it a wave of emotion so powerful that she nearly dropped the key. "Lucien, before you speak," he interrupted gently, "allow me to explain myself fully. When first we met in that chapel last winter, I recognized in you a spirit that had been wounded but never broken. As I came to know you better, I discovered a woman of rare courage, compassion, and integrity. I witnessed your transformation from a victim of cruelty to an architect of healing, not just for yourself but for countless others." He paused, drawing a measured breath before continuing. "I did not intend to form an attachment. Indeed, I feared that any expression of deeper feeling might be misconstrued as pity or worse, as taking advantage of your vulnerability. Yet, form an attachment you did," Seraphine observed softly, her eyes never leaving his face. "Yes," he acknowledged with simple directness. "I love you, Seraphine Ardent, not despite your scars, but including them as part of the remarkable woman you are. I love your resilience, your gentleness, your fierce determination to transform suffering into purpose. I love the way light returns to your eyes when you speak of the Foundation's work, and how you can still find beauty in the world after all you have endured." He gestured to the key still resting in her palm. "I offer you this, not as a rescue or a solution, but as a partnership. You have built a life of meaning and dignity from the ruins of what was taken from you. I ask only for the privilege of sharing that life, supporting your work, and walking beside you as you continue to heal and grow." Seraphine looked down at the key, its polished surface reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. For so long she had defined herself by what had happened to her, first as a victim, then as a survivor. The prospect of defining herself as something else entirely, as a woman beloved, as a duchess, as a partner, rather than merely a beneficiary of kindness, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You understand," she said carefully, "that there may always be shadows. Nights when the past returns in dreams, moments when an unexpected touch causes me to flinch. I cannot promise perfect healing. I would never presume to expect it," he replied with gentle seriousness, "nor do I offer perfect understanding. I can only promise patience, respect, and a love that asks nothing more than what you freely wish to give." A breeze stirred the roses, releasing their fragrance into the evening air. From the east wing came the sound of a piano being played, one of the Foundation's residents rediscovering a talent long abandoned. "I have not allowed myself to think of love," Seraphine admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "After Mero, I believed that part of me had been permanently damaged, that no man would want—" She stopped, struggling to articulate the depth of her former despair. "That no man would want a woman bearing another's marks," Lucien finished for her, understanding in his eyes. "But you see, Seraphine, those marks are not his anymore. They are yours, badges of a battle fought and won, testament to a strength few possess." He extended his hand, palm upward, echoing the gesture he had made months ago when she had first shown him her scars. "I do not ask for an immediate answer. Take what time you need to consider." "Yes," she interrupted, placing the key back in his palm and covering it with her own hand. "My answer is yes, Lucien." For a moment, he appeared stunned by her directness. Then a smile of such unguarded joy transformed his features that Seraphine felt her heart expand with answering emotion. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice slightly unsteady. "I have spent a year hiding from life," she replied, newfound confidence strengthening her words. "I will not hide from love as well, especially not a love offered with such understanding and respect." With exquisite gentleness, Lucien raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm where the key had rested. "Then, with your permission, my lady, I shall speak to the vicar tomorrow. Unless you prefer a longer engagement." Seraphine shook her head, her decision crystallizing with surprising clarity. "No more waiting. Life is too precious to delay its fullest expression." As twilight deepened around them, they walked together through the garden that had witnessed her gradual healing. The roses nodded in the evening breeze, their petals catching the last golden light of day. Above them, the first stars appeared in a sky the same deep blue as the gown she had worn to face her past. "Lady Seraphine Davenant, Duchess of Illyrian," she murmured experimentally, testing the sound of her future name. "It has a certain ring to it, does it not?" "Indeed," agreed Lucien, his arm warm against hers as they passed beneath an arbor heavy with climbing roses. "Though to me you will always be, first and foremost, the woman who transformed silk and shame into strength and purpose. And you," she replied, turning to face him in the gathering dusk, "will always be the man whose hand found the truth I could not speak and helped me find my voice again." In the soft twilight of the garden, as roses released their perfume into the summer air, the Duke of Illyrian bent his head to kiss his future Duchess. His touch was gentle, reverent, a promise rather than a possession. And Seraphine, who had once hidden every mark of vulnerability beneath layers of silk and silence, lifted her face to his without fear, embracing at last the most profound truth of all, that love, offered with respect and received with courage, could heal wounds that time alone could never touch. Together they would build a life that honored both their pasts while creating something entirely new, a legacy of compassion, a testament to resilience, and above all, a love that saw truth clearly and cherished it completely. In the garden of human experience, our deepest wounds often become our greatest teachers. Lady Seraphine's journey reminds us that true healing does not mean erasing the marks of our past, but rather reclaiming them as chapters in our own story, no longer defined by the hands that caused them, but by our courage in carrying them forward. The most profound form of love is not one that pretends not to see our scars, but one that witnesses them with reverence and understands they are integral to who we have become. When the Duke first extended his hand to Seraphine, he offered not erasure of her pain, but acknowledgement of her strength in surviving it. Society may whisper and judge, creating prisons of shame around those who have suffered. Yet these walls dissolve not through hiding, but through standing in one's truth with dignity. The marks beneath our silk, whether visible on skin or carried silently within, lose their power to diminish us when brought compassionately into the light. Perhaps the most beautiful transformation is when personal suffering becomes purpose, when what was meant to destroy us instead becomes the foundation upon which we build sanctuary for others. The Ellsworth Foundation grew from Seraphine's pain, offering redemption not just for herself, but for countless women who would follow. Remember this truth, dear listener. No one has the right to author your story but you. Whatever marks life has left upon you, they belong now only to your narrative of resilience. And somewhere there exists a hand ready to hold yours, not to rescue you from your truth, but to honor you for it. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more tales of redemption and love that sees beyond surface appearances. Share in the comments how you've transformed your own wounds into wisdom, your own silk and shame into strength and purpose. Together, we continue to write stories of healing that echo far beyond our individual lives.